The humid Louisiana air hung heavy, thick with the scent of magnolias and the drone of cicadas. Inside the sprawling, two-story house on the outskirts of Baton Rouge, the atmosphere was just as stifling, but for entirely different reasons. Katherine Vance, all of 10 years old, sat hunched over a half-finished drawing of a fantastical creature, a griffin with butterfly wings, while her younger sister, Seraphina, practiced pirouettes in the center of the living room. Katherine, or Katie as she preferred, had always been a quiet child, more comfortable in the company of her sketchbooks and fantasy novels than with other children. She was also, to put it plainly, large. Not just tall, but broad, solid, a child who seemed to take up more space than she should. It wasn't a medical condition, it was simply how she was built. In a family that prized appearances, this made her an anomaly. Seraphina, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of grace and energy. A year younger than Katie, she possessed a delicate beauty, a dancer's lithe frame, and a personality that radiated charm like the sun. Where Katie was introspective and hesitant, Seraphina was bold and captivating. She was the golden child, the one who effortlessly drew the admiration of everyone she met. Their parents, Charles and Vivian Vance, were prominent figures in Baton Rouge society. Charles, a successful lawyer, was a man of imposing stature and a booming voice. Vivian, a former beauty queen, was the epitome of Southern elegance, always impeccably dressed and coiffed. They were a power couple, their lives a carefully curated performance of success and refinement. And Seraphina fit perfectly into their meticulously crafted world. Katie, however, did not. "Katie, darling, could you try to sit up straighter?" Vivian's voice, smooth as honey but with an underlying edge of steel, cut through Katie's concentration. "You're slouching like a sack of potatoes." Katie flushed, her cheeks burning with shame. She straightened her back, acutely aware of the way her flesh strained against the fabric of her dress. She knew her mother's comments weren't meant to be cruel, but they stung nonetheless. It was a constant refrain in their household. "Sit up straighter. Don't eat so much. Why can't you be more like Seraphina?" Seraphina, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, continued her dance, her movements fluid and effortless. She paused, striking a pose, and beamed at her parents. "Did you see that, Daddy? Mama? Madame Sophie says I have the potential to be a prima ballerina." Charles and Vivian beamed back, their faces alight with pride. "Of course, darling," Charles boomed. "You're a natural. A true Vance." Katie watched the exchange, a familiar ache in her chest. She loved Seraphina, fiercely and protectively. She admired her sister's talent and charisma. But she also couldn't help but feel a pang of envy, a longing to be seen, to be appreciated for who she was, not for who she wasn't. The years that followed were a blur of similar scenes. Katie retreated further into her world of books and art, finding solace in the stories of heroes and heroines who were valued for their inner strength and courage, not their outward appearance. She excelled in school, her sharp mind and quiet diligence earning her top marks. But academic achievements were a pale substitute for the social acceptance she craved. School was a battlefield. While Seraphine thrived, making friends at an incredible rate, Katie was the constant target of whispers and taunts. "Elephant Katie," they called her, their voices dripping with malice. "Donut Queen." "Blubber Butt." The insults were relentless, each one a tiny pinprick that slowly deflated her spirit. She tried to ignore them, to pretend they didn't hurt. But the words burrowed deep, planting seeds of self-doubt and insecurity. She started to believe them, to see herself through their eyes, a clumsy, unattractive, unworthy girl. The only refuge she found was in the school library, a hushed sanctuary filled with the comforting scent of old paper and ink. She devoured books, losing herself in tales of faraway lands and extraordinary adventures. The library became her second home, the librarian, Mrs. Du Bois, a kind and understanding presence in her otherwise turbulent life. "You have a gift, Katherine," Mrs. Du Bois would say, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "A gift for words, for stories. Don't let anyone dim your light." But Katie found it hard to believe her. How could she have a gift when she felt so ordinary? So invisible? The contrast between her and Seraphina only intensified as they entered high school. Seraphina blossomed into a stunning young woman, her beauty drawing attention wherever she went. She was the star of the school's dance team, the queen of every social gathering, the object of every boy's affection. Katie, meanwhile, remained on the periphery, a shadow in Seraphina's radiant light. She was the smart one, the quiet one, the one who always had her nose in a book. She was, in the eyes of her peers, and increasingly in her own, the fat sister. The bullying didn't stop, it simply evolved. The childish taunts were replaced by more subtle forms of cruelty. Exclusion from parties, snide remarks disguised as compliments, the constant, unspoken comparison to Seraphina. One particularly painful incident occurred during their sophomore year. The school was holding a spring dance, a formal affair that Seraphina had been looking forward to for months. She had a date, a handsome senior named Ethan, and a dazzling new dress. Katie, of course, wasn't going. She had no date, no dress, and no desire to subject herself to the inevitable stares and whispers. She planned to spend the evening at home, curled up with a book. But as Seraphina was getting ready, a crisis erupted. The zipper on her dress had broken, irreparably damaged. Seraphina was in tears, her perfect evening seemingly ruined. Vivian, ever the problem solver, had an idea. "Katie," she said, turning to her elder daughter. "You're good with a needle and thread, aren't you? Could you try to fix Seraphina's dress?" Katie, surprised but eager to help, agreed. She carefully examined the broken zipper, her fingers deftly manipulating the fabric. After an hour of painstaking work, she managed to repair it, almost invisibly. Seraphina was overjoyed, her tears replaced by a radiant smile. "Thank you, Katie," she exclaimed, hugging her sister tightly. "You saved my night." For a brief moment, Katie felt a flicker of pride, a sense of belonging. She had helped her sister, used her skills to make a difference. But the moment was fleeting. As Seraphina twirled in front of the mirror, admiring her reflection, Vivian made a comment that shattered Katie's fragile sense of self-worth. "You know, Katie," she said, her voice laced with a mixture of pity and condescension. "If you lost some weight, you could wear dresses like that too." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Katie's heart sank. Even in her moment of triumph, she was reminded of her perceived flaws, of her inadequacy. Seraphina, oblivious to the pain she had caused, simply smiled and said, "Yeah, Katie, you should totally try to lose weight. You'd look so much better." Katie mumbled a non-committal response and retreated to her room, the joy of helping her sister replaced by a familiar wave of shame and self-loathing. The incident reinforced a painful truth. In her family's eyes, and perhaps in the world's, her worth was inextricably tied to her appearance. The dynamic between the sisters began to shift subtly during their high school years. While Katie initially reveled in her role as Seraphina's older, protective sister, a growing sense of resentment began to simmer beneath the surface. This wasn't a sudden, explosive change, but rather a slow, insidious erosion of their bond, fueled by the constant comparisons and the starkly different ways they were treated. Katie noticed how Seraphina, accustomed to being the center of attention, sometimes took her sister's support for granted. Seraphina would borrow Katie's clothes without asking, often stretching them out or returning them stained. She'd interrupt Katie's study time with demands for help with her own homework, expecting Katie to drop everything and cater to her needs. What stung the most, however, was Seraphina's increasing willingness to participate, even instigate, the bullying Katie faced at school. It started subtly. Seraphina would laugh along with her friends when they made jokes about Katie's weight. She'd make helpful suggestions about Katie's diet or wardrobe, often in front of others, couching her criticisms in a tone of mock concern. "Katie, honey, are you sure you want to eat that?" she'd ask, her eyes wide and innocent, as Katie reached for a slice of pizza at lunch. "You know, carbs are so bad for you." The comments, delivered with Seraphina's signature charm, were always met with laughter from her friends. Katie would force a smile, pretending to be unfazed, but inside, she was seething. The cruelty escalated. Seraphina and her friends started a running joke about Katie's thunder thighs, giggling and whispering whenever Katie walked by. They'd deliberately exclude her from social events, making excuses about limited space or not her kind of scene. One afternoon, Katie overheard Seraphina talking to her friends in the hallway. They were discussing a party that was being held that weekend. "Is Katie coming?" one of Seraphina's friends asked. Seraphina laughed, a high-pitched, dismissive sound. "Oh, God, no. She'd just sit in a corner and eat all the snacks. Besides, she'd totally cramp our style." Katie, hidden around the corner, felt her heart shatter into a million pieces. Her own sister, the person she had always protected and adored, saw her as an embarrassment, a burden. She confronted Seraphina later that day, her voice trembling with hurt and anger. "Why do you do that?" she asked. "Why do you treat me like I'm some kind of freak?" Seraphina, initially defensive, quickly shifted to her usual tactic of feigned innocence. "Katie, I don't know what you're talking about. We're just joking around. You're being way too sensitive." "Sensitive?" Katie retorted. "You're deliberately humiliating me in front of your friends. You're making my life miserable." "Oh, come on, Katie, don't be so dramatic," Seraphina said, rolling her eyes. "It's not my fault you're so, you know." She gestured vaguely at Katie's body. The conversation ended in a stalemate, with Katie feeling more isolated and betrayed than ever. She realized that Seraphina wasn't just oblivious to her pain, she was actively contributing to it. The incident marked a turning point in their relationship. Katie stopped trying to confide in Seraphina, stopped seeking her approval. She built a wall around herself, protecting her heart from further hurt. Their parents, Charles and Vivian, remained largely oblivious to the growing rift between their daughters. They were too preoccupied with Seraphina's social triumphs and academic pursuits to notice Katie's quiet suffering. When Katie did try to talk to them about Seraphina's behavior, they dismissed her concerns as sibling rivalry or teenage drama. "Katie, you're just jealous of Seraphina's popularity," Vivian would say, her voice laced with impatience. "You need to learn to be happy for her success," Charles would add. "Seraphina's just being a typical teenager. You're being too sensitive, Katie. Toughen up." Their lack of understanding only deepened Katie's sense of isolation. She felt like she was living in a parallel universe, her experiences and emotions invisible to the people who were supposed to love and support her the most. The one area where Katie consistently received praise was her academic performance. She poured her energy into her studies, finding solace in the intellectual challenges and the satisfaction of achieving top grades. Her report cards were a source of pride for Charles and Vivian, but even this became a source of contention with Seraphina. Seraphina, while intelligent, wasn't as naturally gifted academically as Katie. She had to work harder to maintain good grades, and she resented the ease with which Katie seemed to excel. "It's not fair," Seraphina would complain. "You're just naturally smart. I have to actually try." Their parents, in their misguided attempts to motivate Seraphina, would often use Katie as an example. "Why can't you be more like Katie?" they'd ask. "She always gets straight A's. You need to apply yourself more." These comparisons only fueled Seraphina's resentment, creating a vicious cycle of competition and animosity. Seraphina began to sabotage Katie's efforts, hiding her textbooks, accidentally deleting her essays, and spreading rumors about her cheating. One evening, Katie discovered that Seraphina had taken her meticulously researched history project, a project that was due the next day, and replaced it with a blank folder. Katie was devastated. She had spent weeks working on the project, pouring hours of research and writing into it. She confronted Seraphina, her voice shaking with rage. "Why would you do that?" she demanded. "That project was worth half my grade." Seraphina, caught in the act, feigned innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her eyes wide and guileless. "Maybe you just misplaced it." But Katie knew the truth. She saw the flicker of guilt in Seraphina's eyes, the slight smirk that played on her lips. That night, Katie stayed up all night, frantically trying to recreate her project. She managed to complete a rough draft, but it was nowhere near the quality of her original work. She received a lower grade than she deserved, and the incident further cemented her belief that Seraphina was actively working against her. The relationship between the sisters continued to deteriorate, marked by a growing distance and a simmering undercurrent of resentment. Katie retreated further into herself, finding solace in her books and her art, while Seraphina continued to bask in the glow of social approval and parental adoration. The chrysalis was hardening, the cactus growing sharper spines. College offered Katie a chance for a fresh start, a chance to escape the suffocating atmosphere of her family home and the constant comparisons to Seraphina. She chose a prestigious university several states away, a place where she could be known for her own merits, not as Seraphina's sister. She thrived in the academic environment, immersing herself in her studies and discovering a passion for literature and creative writing. She joined the university's literary magazine, eventually becoming its editor-in-chief. She made friends with a group of like-minded individuals, students who valued her intelligence and her wit, not her appearance. For the first time in her life, Katie felt a sense of belonging, a sense of being seen and appreciated for who she was. She started to shed the layers of self-doubt and insecurity that had accumulated over the years, blossoming into a confident and articulate young woman. She even started dating, tentatively at first, but gradually gaining confidence in her ability to attract and connect with others. She had a brief relationship with a fellow English major, a kind and intelligent young man who appreciated her for her mind and her spirit. While the relationship didn't last, it was a significant step for Katie. It proved to her that she was desirable, that she was worthy of love and affection, regardless of her size. Seraphina, meanwhile, chose a different path. She stayed closer to home, attending a local college known more for its social scene than its academic rigor. She continued to excel in dance, joining a semi-professional company and performing in regional competitions. She also continued to enjoy the attention and admiration of her peers, effortlessly navigating the social landscape of college life. She dated a string of handsome, popular boys, always the center of attention at parties and social gatherings. But beneath the surface, Seraphina's life wasn't as perfect as it seemed. She struggled with the pressure to maintain her image, the constant need to be on, to be the perfect, beautiful, charming Seraphina that everyone expected her to be. She also felt a growing sense of emptiness, a nagging feeling that something was missing. Her social triumphs and romantic conquests felt hollow, lacking the depth and meaning she craved. The sisters saw each other less frequently during their college years, their lives diverging along increasingly separate paths. They exchanged occasional phone calls and emails, but their conversations were superficial, lacking the closeness they had once shared. Katie, immersed in her new life and her newfound confidence, felt a sense of relief at the distance. She no longer felt the constant need to measure herself against Seraphina, to compete for her parents' attention. Seraphina, on the other hand, felt a mixture of envy and resentment towards Katie. She saw Katie's academic success and her growing independence as a threat, a reminder of her own perceived shortcomings. Their parents, Charles and Vivian, continued to favor Seraphina, praising her accomplishments and celebrating her social triumphs. They saw Katie's academic pursuits as less glamorous, less worthy of their attention. Seraphina's going to be a star. Charles would boast to his friends. She's got the talent, the looks, the drive. She's going to make us proud. They rarely mentioned Katie's achievements, dismissing them as nerdy or unimportant. Their lack of support and understanding further solidified Katie's resolve to forge her own path, to create a life that was independent of her family's expectations. After graduation, Katie moved to New York City, accepting a job as an editorial assistant at a prestigious publishing house. She embraced the vibrant, diverse culture of the city, finding a sense of freedom and anonymity that she had never experienced before. She continued to write, honing her craft and submitting her work to literary magazines. She attended workshops and readings, connecting with other writers and artists. She built a life for herself that was rich and fulfilling, a life that was entirely her own. Seraphina, meanwhile, remained in Baton Rouge, struggling to find her place in the world. Her dreams of becoming a professional dancer had faded, replaced by a series of dead-end jobs and unfulfilling relationships. She felt trapped, stifled by the expectations of her family and the limitations of her small-town life. She envied Katie's freedom, her success, her seemingly effortless ability to reinvent herself. The years passed, and the sisters remained estranged, their lives separated by distance and by the lingering resentments of their childhood. The chrysalis had emerged, transformed, while the cactus remained rooted, its spines growing ever sharper. The stage was set for a reckoning, a confrontation that would force them to confront the past and determine the future of their fractured relationship. The news of Seraphina's engagement arrived in the form of a lavishly embossed invitation, delivered to Katie's small, but cozy, New York apartment. Katie stared at the creamy cardstock, the elegant script announcing the upcoming nuptials of Katherine Vance to Beau Landry, a scion of a wealthy Louisiana oil family. A wave of complex emotions washed over Katie. She felt a pang of genuine happiness for her sister, a flicker of hope that Seraphina had finally found the love and stability she craved. But beneath the surface, the old resentment simmered, stirred up by the reminder of her family's priorities and her own place within their carefully constructed world. She hadn't seen her family in over a year, their communication limited to brief, obligatory phone calls on birthdays and holidays. She knew that attending the wedding would mean facing the familiar dynamic, the subtle jabs and comparisons, the constant reminder of her perceived inadequacies. But she also knew that not attending would be seen as a betrayal, a confirmation of her family's belief that she was the difficult one, the one who didn't fit in. She wrestled with the decision for days, weighing her own well-being against the pressure to conform to her family's expectations. She talked to her therapist, a wise and empathetic woman who had helped her navigate the complexities of her family relationships. "Katie," her therapist said gently, "you have a right to protect yourself. You don't have to subject yourself to a situation that you know will be painful and damaging." But Katie also felt a sense of obligation, a lingering desire to connect with her family, to prove to them that she was worthy of their love and acceptance. She finally decided to attend the wedding, but with a newfound sense of resolve. She would go as herself, confident and unapologetic, refusing to be drawn into the old patterns of comparison and competition. She booked a flight to Baton Rouge, dreading the trip but determined to face it with grace and dignity. The reunion with her family was as awkward and strained as she had anticipated. Charles and Vivian greeted her with a mixture of forced enthusiasm and thinly veiled criticism. "Katie, darling, you look different," Vivian said, her eyes scanning Katie's stylish, but simple, dress. "Have you gained weight?" Katie, refusing to be baited, simply smiled and said, "I'm healthy and happy, Mom. That's all that matters." Seraphina, radiant in her pre-wedding glow, was initially more welcoming. She hugged Katie tightly and exclaimed, "Katie, you look great. I'm so glad you're here." But the warmth quickly faded, replaced by a familiar undercurrent of competition. Seraphina bombarded Katie with questions about her life in New York, her job, her romantic prospects, her tone a mixture of curiosity and condescension. "So, are you still single?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with malicious amusement. "Don't you want to find someone and settle down?" Katie, refusing to be drawn into the old game, simply said, "I'm happy with my life, Seraphina. I'm focused on my career and my writing." The pre-wedding festivities were a whirlwind of social events, each one a carefully orchestrated performance of Southern charm and extravagance. Katie felt like an outsider, a spectator in a world that she had never truly belonged to. She observed her family, their interactions, their unspoken dynamics. She saw the way Charles and Vivian doted on Seraphina, showering her with praise and attention. She saw the way Seraphina basked in their adoration, effortlessly playing the role of the perfect daughter. And she saw the way they looked at her, Katie, with a mixture of pity and disapproval. She was the anomaly, the one who didn't fit into their picture-perfect world. The breaking point came during a family lunch, a few days before the wedding. Charles and Vivian, fueled by champagne and a sense of self-importance, began to reminisce about Seraphina's childhood, recounting her accomplishments and praising her beauty. Seraphina was always such a graceful child, Vivian said, her voice laced with nostalgia. She was a natural dancer, a born performer. Charles added. She was always the belle of the ball, the one who turned heads wherever she went. They went on, extolling Seraphina's virtues and ignoring Katie's presence entirely. Katie sat in silence, her heart aching with a familiar mixture of sadness and anger. Finally, Seraphina turned to Katie, her expression a mixture of smugness and condescension. So, Katie, she said. What have you been up to? Still writing those little stories of yours? The question, delivered with a dismissive tone, was the final straw. Katie stood up, her chair scraping against the polished floor. Actually, Seraphina, she said, her voice clear and steady. I've just had a novel accepted for publication. It's a story about two sisters, and the complex dynamics of their relationship. A hush fell over the table. Charles and Vivian stared at Katie, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Seraphina's smile faltered, replaced by a look of unease. A novel? Charles finally said, his voice laced with skepticism. You're actually going to be a published author? Yes, Katie said, her gaze unwavering. And I'm very proud of it. Vivian, recovering her composure, attempted to regain control of the conversation. Well, that's nice, Katie, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But let's not forget that this is Seraphina's week. We should be focusing on her and her wedding. The statement from Vivian was not the spark, however it had set the kindling. Seraphina took a long look at Katie, and with a sly smile asked. So Katie, are you seeing anyone, special? I am just concerned you're going to end up an old maid. And are you planning to do anything about all that, wait? That was it. Katie felt a surge of anger, a wave of pent-up frustration that had been building for years. She looked at her family, their faces frozen in expressions of shock and disapproval, and she realized that she was done. Done with the comparisons, the criticisms, the constant need to prove herself. You know what? She said, her voice trembling with emotion. I'm done. I'm done with this family, with your constant judgment, with your obsession with appearances. I'm done trying to be someone I'm not, just to please you. She turned to Seraphina, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. And you, Seraphina? She said. You're the worst of them all. You've always been jealous of me, always tried to put me down. You're so insecure that you have to make other people feel small, just to make yourself feel better. Seraphina gasped, her face turning pale. Charles and Vivian stood up, their faces contorted with rage. How dare you speak to your sister like that? Charles roared. You ungrateful, disrespectful child. Vivian added. You're just jealous of Seraphina's happiness. You're a bitter, lonely woman, and you can't stand to see anyone else succeed. Katie stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. I'm not jealous, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that you, my own family, can't see me for who I am. That you can't love and accept me, just the way I am. She turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving her family stunned and speechless. She walked out of the house, out of their lives, with a sense of liberation she had never felt before. She went back to her hotel room, packed her bags, and booked the first flight back to New York. She didn't attend Seraphina's wedding. She didn't answer their calls or respond to their texts. She cut them out of her life, completely and irrevocably. It was a painful decision, but it was also a necessary one. She had finally realized that she couldn't change her family, that she couldn't force them to love and accept her. She had to love and accept herself, to create a life that was free from their toxic influence. The chrysalis had broken free, leaving the cactus behind, its sharp spines no longer able to wound. The butterfly had taken flight, soaring towards a future of her own making.